All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Yanis, and I hope you are here to join us to talk about building an awesome business case and calculating ROI. I am Molly Yanis with Echolocity, and today we're going to be talking about why business cases matter, key components of a strong business case, how to calculate return on investment or ROI. We'll talk about a real-world example of implementing a work management software and building a business case for doing so. And we'll talk about common pitfalls to avoid so that you can really have the best success with business cases. And we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Again, my name is Molly Yanis. I'm a solution architect and CEO here at Echolocity. I was the founder of Echo Consulting. We've been around since 2019, and I'm also the founder and product manager of Shoreline, a strategic alignment and decision-making software. I'm known as the question queen, and I am super passionate about blending people, process, and technology for developing solutions that really fit the organization's goals. And I especially love working with growing teams and strong champions that are looking to solve real-world problems. If you would like more of my content, I recommend connecting with me on LinkedIn. You can also use a Calendly link to book another meeting, and I'll provide more contact information at the end of this session today. Our team here at Echolocity, they're amazing, and I'll just really quickly, our services, software implementation, project management, PMO, staff augmentation for project management, team extension, workshops, training, change management strategies, so much more. But let's dive in to why we're here today, which is why business cases matter. A business case is not just a step to secure approval and funding, although that is probably what most people think of it for. Really, when I'm thinking about why an organization should use business cases, I'm thinking about taking the time to ensure that you have an executive sponsor, executive commitment, and how do you make sure that you have that, right? Well, you need to make sure that whatever you're developing a business case around, and in most cases today, I'm going to be talking about developing a business case for a project because that's oftentimes what here at Echo we're talking about. But for a product, for a business, there's lots of different ways that a business case comes into play. But within an organization, you want to ensure that you have that executive commitment sponsorship. You want to make sure that you have stakeholders and that you've really reviewed the concept with other people. You want to align it to the strategic goals of the organization and you want to make sure that you're taking time to articulate the value that you're trying to get. Too often we see it in terms of challenges and problems and like, hey, this is what the solution is, but this is a moment to take a breath. And this is a huge tool for a project manager to have going into a new project is to be able to have a business case where we're clearly articulating what our end goal is, what value we're expecting to get, and backing up those assertions with data. And we'll be talking about how to calculate that today. And then near and dear to my heart, risk management. So a business case, again, I keep saying taking time, feeling it, making sure that there's a structured evaluation process, right? That we are identifying those costs and benefits and risks ahead of time, the assumptions that we're making, the gaps that we currently have, the current state, that we're taking time to put data behind it in terms of what outcomes we're expecting to have, payback time, what is ROI? We're going to get into all of that today. But when I say why a business case matters, right, probably similar to a project, it needs executive sponsorship. It needs people to buy into it and really push it forward. And a business case is a way to pitch that and to start generating that buy-in early and really ensure the success longer term. All right. I'm also going to be totally real with you, which is sometimes business cases can be a waste of time. And I have been in a lot of different organizations with really heavy business case processes, with really heavy project charter situations where it really didn't make sense. And so I do want to also clarify that business cases are super important. I do recommend them. They don't have to be super heavy, depending on the size of the ask and the culture of the organization and the decision-making quality and things like that. So, one, If you don't have a sponsor, if you have not talked to someone on the leadership team, if you have not kind of socialized this idea, I don't recommend starting with a business case. I recommend socializing the idea, getting feedback before you're spending a huge amount of time on that, right? If you don't have a champion, you're not likely to get follow through. It's just a bunch of research. It's analysis paralysis, et cetera. So if you don't have a sponsor, start there, not with the business case. Sometimes the scope is too small or low risk. Oftentimes organizations manage that by having managers that have a certain capacity to make budgeting decisions based on annual budgeting. But simple decisions, smaller things that only impact one team especially, it might not require a full business case. It might not require a huge amount of, requirements and everything in the beginning. It can be less formal. So again, love business cases. We'll talk all the time about this today, but I do want to call out that it doesn't always make sense. If an organization doesn't have decision-making discipline, a business case isn't going to solve that problem, right? A business case is a way to articulate information and value and things like that. But if you don't have a group of people that can review this and make a decision and communicate that out, the business case does not solve that problem. Just like implementing a new technology does not solve for the fact that you don't have a project management methodology, like the business case doesn't solve for that. It can be a good place to start. I've definitely seen organizations where they've started doing, 4 blockers or 1-slide business cases, super simple things just to kind of distill the information down to make it easier for executive leadership. But again, if you don't have that discipline, you don't have that methodology in place, the business case doesn't solve for that. And then the other piece that I see is always really interesting is organizations that have already decided that they're going to move forward and then they do the business case. And I have a problem with this both directions. One, if it's already decided, the business case is just a formality. Now, typically I would just say, it's a waste of time. Like you're just adding extra step in there. However, I've seen business cases be a really effective communication method and a really effective tool to hand off to the project team. So I do want to just say, I recommend the business case being earlier on before the approval. However, if you don't have one as a project manager, whether it is in the business case or a charter or some other way, you still need to be able to articulate the value and have a clear vision for where you're going. So that's why I gave that one a star. Okay, we're going to actually dive right into a strong business case, and we're actually going to use an example, but at a really high level. And just so you know, I have provided 3 different business case examples and links to those available templates at the end of the session. But for today, we're going to talk at a high level of a strong business case. You want to have a summary, right? You want to have a problem statement, a proposed solution. Super important. You need to articulate the alternatives considered. One of the first things I work with clients on, and oftentimes they're like, well, no, we don't care about what we're doing now. It's all over the place. Like we just, where we're going. No, you need to give the alternative of what is currently happening today, because that is true. Not making a change is a possibility. You need to have benefits. We're going to dive deep into the different benefits, both quantitative and qualitative, and how to actually measure quantitatively. That can be really hard and scary for a lot of people. We'll talk about cost and risk at a high level and do a couple really basic graphics on payback periods and things like that. And then we'll talk about recommendations for kind of next steps for you as you move forward in this process. All right, so throughout the webinar today, we're going to be talking about a business case example that is near and dear to my heart, which is implementing a work management software. So Smartsheet, Asana, Monday, ClickUp, etc. Now, again, this is just meant to be an example to help articulate how a business case works and what the different pieces are and things like that. So we're going to use that example as we walk through how to do a really persuasive, great business case, and then also how to calculate the ROI on some of these things. A lot of the calculations and time savings and things like that will apply to pretty much any project or initiative that you're trying to pitch. All right, so when I start thinking about implementing work management software, right, like that's kind of a, hey, this is what we want to do. This is the, the title of the business case. I start with just my problems and challenges, right? So oftentimes this is feedback from individuals, and sometimes it can really be spurred on by a specific thing like a major project delay or a major budget overage or something like that. But I just start with like a list of, hey, these are my common problems and challenges. So, hey, we're having delays, we're having bottlenecks, I don't have visibility, there's not enough resources, people are doing throwaway work, all sorts of different reasons, right? So think about internally specific examples when you can give them of situations. So ones that people recognize. Here I'm giving more broad strokes, and you'll hear me later say how business cases shouldn't be that broad, so FYI. But I am using the example here, and it's important that you can give specific examples within your organization, but these are problems and challenges. I like to transform this list of problems and challenges into an actual problem statement. So when I go into the business case, I'm going to send this deck out. So you don't need to take screenshots. Anyone that's registered for the webinar, or if you haven't registered and you're checking this out on YouTube later, reach out. We'll give you the slides. This is just an example. So an executive summary, half the time for executive summary, like if I am emailing it out or I am posting it in Teams or something, like it's actually the post around it. But hey, this case is going to be recommending implementing a work management system. We're trying to streamline project coordination, and we're expecting this savings. So you're really summing everything up that you're going to be writing out later. So problem statement, remember how we had those bullets behind? We're actually switching this into like a very simple statement, regular language, delays, miscommunication, we're missing deadlines, we got poor visibility for leadership, etc. When you can pull the problem statement back to specifically articulate a problem that the people that are signing off, your leadership team, the decision maker, the sponsor, has to sign off on, that's great, right? So you see how I ended poor visibility for leadership. So bring it back to the actual stakeholders that are going to be signing off. All right, proposed solution. I'm not giving a specific go all the way to say, hey, Smartsheet. It might be a vendor selection solution. I've had organizations where, they have 8 of them and you need to make a decision. But I am saying, what is the thing? We're recommending implementing a work management tool. So planning, task assignment at a very high level, okay? Now, I mentioned it earlier, alternatives considered, right? So the first alternative is to do nothing. That is an alternative, right? So, and some people say it's not, right? Some people are saying well, end of life of the software, or this person's leaving. And I was like, I get it, right? I do. But the first alternative that I always like to see in a business case is literally what's currently happening. So nothing changes, we don't make any investment, etc. Someone leaves and that person was supposed to approve something, it doesn't get approved, right? It's just not there. Common, again, come from a tech background, so developing an in-house platform or solution. We see so many of this. It's not typically what I recommend. I mean, here at Echo, we recommend low-code, no-code tools. We're not recommending a custom in-house, especially for small businesses. That being said, we've definitely implemented them for enterprise, so I don't want to say that's never an alternative, but that's one of the options. This is using this example, right? Work management platform. I mean, an alternative is to just use a tool you already have that's not actually designed for what you're using it for work management, like task management, things like that. So in this example, Microsoft Teams or something like that. So I want to clearly say with the alternatives that I'm not putting blinders on and just wanting it because this is what I want. I love this, right? I see some organizations that pitch it in a way that's just oh, I love Smartsheet. I used it in my previous company. This is great. Really, this is important to show that you're doing your due diligence and that you're aware of the environment, that you've done some basic research and things like that. So alternatives considered. And then next, benefits. And we're going to talk a lot about this because this is probably the area that people struggle with the most, is measuring the benefit and saying, well, I don't have this information. It's hard. Yeah, it is hard. We're going to talk about it. So benefits, quantitative and qualitative benefits, all right? So we want to make sure that we have quantitative. We're going to have estimates. We're going to talk about how to calculate it, and qualitative, especially, again, this example being work management platform, the user experience, the employee experience, the customer experience, and things like that. And these are things that can be measured in some cases, but oftentimes are, a qualitative statement. All right, let's keep going. Business case example. So for categorizing benefits, really quick, I typically talk about it in terms of quantitative and qualitative. But it's also really important to talk about like hard benefits, something that's tangible that you can really show, that you can calculate, something that is less tangible, but super important, more opinion versus like fact-based and things like that. And then strategic benefits. And honestly, this should be at top. When I say strategic alignments, it's actually saying why this project, why this business case relates to our strategic goals of the organization. It's super important to talk about strategic benefits, whether it is competitive or where your company's going or things like that, how this plays into it. So I would actually put that one at the top, but you'll see it here. The ones that are more obvious are quantitative and qualitative. I'm not going to run through all of these. I just wanted to provide some examples. So types of benefits. Time saved is probably the most common one we see in quantitative, and we're going to talk about calculating time saved. Reduction in overruns for budgets, right? Like that's a very common thing for projects, which is too much budget, not counting for extensions and things like that. Quantitative, like things that, again, coming from a consultant world, coming from a project manager world, meetings, death by meetings and things like that. So one of the quantitative, instead of just saying like hours and time, is actually just quantifying it in meetings. And then increase on-time delivery. This is important for in terms of her like project is actually completed on time, but also delivery of a given product or customer or something like that. And then one of the big things we've seen right now is just there's so much tool expansion where there's so many different tools, and trying to consolidate and bring it in and not have as much chaos. So even just reduction. And oftentimes, again, these quantitative benefits are typically related to a strategic goal or a strategic direction of the organization. But here are a couple of examples. And then more qualitative, saying improving cross-team collaboration. Now, I can think of ways to measure that, right? Especially with like Microsoft Teams, where you have the analytics of the different interactions and things like that. You can actually check that over time. So a lot of these qualitative things could be measured. Sometimes you don't need to, or it's too much. You don't want to get to a point of like you're quantifying everything to the point where you're, one, overcomplicating it, and or you lose trust in the data because you're trying to put numbers to everything. So having a blend of quantitative and qualitative is important. And then net promoter score, whether it's a customer or an employee, right? These are quick surveys. These are quick things where you're saying like, hey, would you recommend this? How was this, et cetera. Important to do it over time, at the moment, 3 months after, 6 months, a year, et cetera, so that you can kind of see trends over time with those benefits. Alrighty, so I'm going to keep going here. So the first point of adding some numbers to it. So regardless of what business case you're building, what project you're pitching, what product you're pitching, one of the big things that you're going to, come up with is time savings. So you need to identify the activities, the tasks, especially the repeatable ones, right, that take time, that this solution is hoping to reduce, right, in this example. So search for information across platforms, manual task assignment tracking, status update meetings. These are some examples of time-consuming activities. So now we're going to have to make an estimate or a guesstimate or something like that. If you have time tracking data, great. If not, surveys. If not, estimates based on your knowledge and your organization and what you see. But in this example, we're saying, all right, we think that employees are going to save 2 hours per week on task tracking and task reporting, right? That is an assumption. Now, if you have a CFO, if you have a leadership team that is like really going to push on this number, then one of the things I like to have in my back pocket is what I call most likely versus worst case scenario and best case scenario. So I can basically run this calculation 3 times very easily by saying, all right, this is what I think is going to happen, which is 2 hours a week. But even if it only saved us 1 hour a week, or it has the potential to save us 4 hours a week in the long run, right? And then actually provide them 3 different calculations. It's just like a way that your brain works and cognitive biases and everything. If you see 3 and there's one in the middle, like that's the one you think is true. So just the way that you preface this is also important. You have to know your audience and who's going to do this. Your organization might have like a specific way of calculating this as well, but this is like the most common one, right? So all right, we're saying 2 hours a week that is going to be savings. We're going to multiply that times the number of team members or employees that are going to make that savings. It's not everyone, right? Maybe you're only talking about your project teams. Maybe you're only talking about, your customer service team. So you're picking an amount of time. Then you're picking the amount of people. You're picking the amount of time in terms of the duration. And so in this case, I typically use like annual, right? So 52 weeks, but you could run the same thing with, half a week, a quarter, etc. And then you're just multiplying it all out. So how many hours, right? So now you have an hours concept, and you're going to multiply the hours times an average hourly wage. Again, have seen this more complicated where you don't have a blended and you can actually do it by real people. Again, depends on the organization, your culture, what your goals is. I ask that organizations think about balancing this out in terms of how much time you spend on the analysis when you know that these are estimates. I like using calculators so that I can quickly make changes on the fly, whether in Excel or Smartsheet or something like that, to show leadership if they want to say, all right, we don't think it's going to be 2, we think it's going to be 1.25, or show me something like this. They can ask weird questions. If you can immediately respond, they're more likely to kind of go with it and give you the benefit of the doubt because you're prepped, you're prepared. All right? So anyways, in this case, I'm saying 2 hours a week times 50 people for an entire year, which is 5,200 hours. And I'm going to say an average of $30 an hour. So I'm going to say, wow, I'm talking about a $156,000 savings per year. Make sense to everyone? All right, so the amount of time per week, the number of weeks that you're going to be calculating it, the number of people, and that gets you the number of hours total for the year. And then that times rate, that again is flexible. You can do that in groups, and then you're getting an annual savings here. Okay, quantifying time savings. So we're going back to the business case example for a moment, and we're talking about not just the benefits, but also the costs. How much is this going to cost? When you are calculating costs, it's very important that you separate out the one-time costs versus the ongoing costs. And so if you are talking about a technology, SaaS, rent, anything like that, right, that's an annual cost. That's an ongoing. You're going to have to pay for that every year versus a one-time cost, which typically is the construction of a warehouse or the implementation of a new software. And during that time, there's training, there's a vendor for configuration of the solution, all that other stuff, right? So have seen very detailed cost estimates, have even seen a situation where you have to have multiple different like vendor estimates or something like that to show comparables and things like that. This is a very high level example, but providing the cost, usually for calculating it, we're just literally going to be using the total cost one time versus annual or repeatable, okay? Super important with a business case, just like we were talking about for those alternatives, this is a place to call out the risks. If you have documented the risks, if you have brought those forward in the business case, right, versus people are coming up with new risks that you haven't thought of, right, the more prepared you are, the more likely that they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. That being said, a business case can be a living, breathing document. The first draft that you socialize, that you bring forward, if there are new risks, if there are adjustments to the solution proposed, or that's great. Update it. Keep it available to people, okay? So here's a high-level example like, hey, it's not adopted. The learning curve is too high. We have too much other change going on, yada, yada, yada. There's lots of different risks associated with any sort of change. And then we're getting into more numbers, which is ROI and payback period. Interestingly enough, I don't actually think I have a slide that says what ROI means. So ROI is return on investment. So what are you expecting to get back from what you're paying, what the cost is, okay? And then the payback period. So I'm going to give money. When am I going to make my money back? Okay. And then that payback period is the period of time that you're recommending, that you're estimating. All right. When I hear about measuring ROI, the first thing I'm hearing is like, well, we don't know this and we don't know this and you're just guessing and everything like that. And so I have a quote that I use sometimes with my team and definitely with my clients, which is like, I get it. It's hard to hit a moving target. We don't know about what's going to happen with the economy. We don't know what's happening politically with tariffs. Oh my goodness, right? People are really struggling. We get it. It is hard to hit a moving target. It is. If there's no target, if you're not making any guesstimate, right? Like if you're not putting something out there to get feedback is a way of getting information, thinking it through, etc. So please don't avoid putting numbers because you know that you're estimating it. Spend the time to get the information, reach out to other people for their opinions and their knowledge and their specialty and put it out there. So now I'm going to actually go into calculating ROI, right? So return on investment. So there's a calculation for this. Like there is a formula, period. How you measure the benefits and how you measure the costs and all these other things, right? Those are more tailored, but like the actual definition of ROI is benefit divided by cost times 100, right? That basically making it a percentage. So net benefit. We just talked about the quantified benefits, right? Now, so here's a great example, right? So quantified benefits are the ones you can put numbers to. But let's say one of the qualified benefits was, less turnover of people because people are less frustrated. That might have just stood as a qualified benefit. Like, yeah, we all agree, like people are going to be less frustrated. We're expecting to lose less people. We're not going to take the time to guess that we are going to lose 1.6 less people over the next 3 months. Like there's not enough data backing it up and things like that, and it's too much guesswork that we're not going to put numbers to it. So in the ROI, it's okay. It's important to list out the qualified benefits. It's also important to stick with the things that you're confident on and that are more measurable and quantifiable for the net benefit. Okay, so quantified benefits minus the total costs. And again, costs might be ranges, get it? If you have ranges, you have people that really want to push on it, okay, that's fine. Most likely, this is what we think it's going to be. Here's on the higher end, here's on the lower end, etc. So anyways, in this case, I'm just doing one, but most likely versus worst case scenario and best case scenario, totally worth it. All right, so quantified benefits minus the costs. So if the annual benefits that we just talked about were $150,000, it's going to cost $60,000 this year, right? Because of that $40,000 to implement and $20,000 in licensing. So the ROI calculation is this total this net benefit, right? So quantified benefits minus cost. So 150,000 minus 60,000, okay? Divided by 60,000 times 100, okay? So that is going to be 150%. So the ROI is we are expecting within the year to have 150% return on investment, okay? So think about that. You're spending 60,000, right? And you're getting back 150,000. Make sense, everyone? All right. So the next one is what we call payback period because, okay, great. I'm going to give you 100,000 or 150,000. I'm giving 60,000. You're going to give me back 150,000. That sounds like a great deal. I love that. But depending on the organization, the cash flow, all the other things, it does matter when I'm going to get that money back. So the classic example is like the lottery, right? So like the lottery is saying like, hey, you can have, you win the lottery, great. You can have $1 million now, or you can have $100,000 over the next 30 years. So if you think about it, it's like, oh, all right, I'm going to get money over the next 30 years. Well, in the project case, by 3 years in, it might not even be worth it anymore. There might be some new tool. You might have done 3 other things. So you do have to be aware of when you think that return on investment is going to come and when you're going to start seeing value from this investment. So if you're doing this investment and you're not expecting to see any return for a year, That's really important. That's why this payback period comes in, okay? So it's not just the total that you're expecting to get, it's the total you're expecting to get and when you're expecting to get it. And that's why I think a line chart is really helpful here, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples, right? So the payback period is the cost, right, divided by the annual benefits. So in this case, the payback, right, is $60,000. It's costing us $60,000. We're going to get $150,000 back in this calculation. And that means it's going to take us, I think my calculation is a little bit wrong here. But anyways, it's going to take about, less than half a year for us to make our money back. That makes sense, right? Okay. If your payback is faster, right, if I get my money back faster, that's better for me. I'm more likely as a business to do that because I know a lot of things change and I don't want to make a 3-year investment in something like a warehouse that I may not need because, Amazon just created another one down the road faster than me. Now it's not worth it anymore, right? So the faster you get, it's a risk reduction and it's obviously better for the company because you get the return back faster. All right, so in here I'm showing what we've actually been saying, which might just sound crazy, right? So it's like, all right, I'm going to pay $60,000. And in this case, I'm just assuming I'm paying it all up front. But again, oftentimes with implementations, there's expenses like over a course of time. But in this super simple example, I'm just saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to pay $60,000 up front for this work management solution, right? Now, in this calculation that I have here, and I can look at the number, well, I guess I can't look at the numbers, I'm in presenter. But in this case, it's saying like, oh, okay, I'm going to get this implementation of this work management, and then I'm going to get benefit in the first month. Now, and then, it's cumulative, so I'm going to get more, and then more, and then more. Oh, okay, great. Now, 4 months in, I've got my payback. It is super important. One of the biggest thing I see is people do these really big calculations for ROI. They say where they got their data from, what their assumptions are, and then they do this and they forget that implementations take time and that change takes time and that everything isn't going to be getting at the full maximum value on day one. So I have also provided the yellow line, which is, right, the cumulative benefit, talking about with implementation and making some assumptions that, it's not going to be as fast a ramp up for this value to start coming, right? So in this case, I'm saying, it's going to take us 3 months to even cut over and to really make this. So I have to give up my $60,000 now, but I have 3 months of implementation where I'm not getting any value. Then when I do start getting value, it's going to be slow going. I'm not going to get that full amount of 2-hour savings per week starting out. Maybe I'm piloting it with a couple of people, so it's not all 50 employees. Like I'm representing a more reasonable case. This is important. This can really be a rabbit hole in a business case presentation where people are like, they see this and they're like, oh yeah, but you've just given me like a totally unreasonable example. Like, I don't trust you. This is just, you're just doing it, right? So I do recommend that you provide like the most reasonable case that you can. If you need to, again, that this is what I think the most likely scenario is, but I also, right, have this worst case scenario, best case scenario. So I'm actually saying, hey, I think it's going to take about 5 months for me to get value back, but or I think it's going to be 7 months for me to get the value back, but like best case scenario, we could get the value back by 5 months, and worst case scenario, it's going to take us a year. So then you're providing that range, and they're more likely to believe the middle one that you gave. Does that make sense to everyone? Alrighty. And then I just provided the little stars, right? These are the payback periods. So if I just say, hey, I'm going to start getting value on day one, no, that's not likely. But here's this star versus the one that I actually think is going to be the most likely. So fail to account for change management, implementation time, slower ramp up for time savings. So try to give as accurate as you can, but don't go crazy with the analysis paralysis. All right, so let's talk more common things to avoid when working on a business case, okay? So ignoring the qualitative benefits, like only focusing on the ones you can measure. I see people that are only like, if you can't measure it, it doesn't count. It absolutely does count. Drawing it back to the strategic benefits, calling out the employee experience, the customer experience, and things like that, not just dollar and cents, not just hours. Definitely include the qualitative benefits, even though it's not going to be in the calculation of the ROI in most cases. Okay. Underestimating implementation and time costs. I just highlighted that one. Like, don't forget to add the change management aspect of it. Super important. And then overpromising results. So saying like, hey, I think it's going to save everyone 10 hours a week to do this. I would be on the more conservative side for this. Oftentimes when you're doing time savings calculation, there's plenty of time to go from. So instead of saying, hey, we're going to cut meetings in half, we're saying, hey, we're going to remove 2 meetings a week for people based on this. So something like that. Try to bring it back to something tangible that people have experience with. And then working on a business case in a vacuum, like just being super passionate and putting all this in and writing a business case and not socializing it with other people that can give you feedback, not socializing it with leadership before going into, an approval or sending it out with things like that. So people contact is still really important. All righty. All right, so I did promise a couple of recommended resources. So a lot, honestly, Google, ChatGPT, whatever you want to use here, there are ROI calculators available. I just provided a couple. So one is like a Monday.com one, and then Smartsheet just really has more about the different ways to do it. We've actually built out ROI calculators that organizations can use within Smartsheet that have Smartsheet. I also have one, I think, in Excel and Google Sheets, etc. So you can actually build one. And when you build your own, you're able to bring in your specific strategic goals and give examples. Oftentimes examples for ROI calculators can be really helpful. So even just going back to that table that I provided earlier in terms of, all right, these are examples of benefits and how people have measured them. And then Project Manager has an ROI calculator template as well. So a lot of these have templates that are also downloadable so they can be in your environment. All right, I talked pretty fast. I didn't get a lot of questions, but I'll give time in just a moment. So a good persuasive business case, it's going to build confidence with stakeholders. It's going to provide clarity around why we're doing this and what we're expecting to get out of it. Can really help with prioritization, decision-making, and things like that. Quantifying benefits, people get really intimidated by this because they're like, well, I don't know this. I won't know this yet. Okay, got it. But remember that like crazy quote of it's hard to hit a moving target, but impossible to hit a target that doesn't exist? Put numbers to it. Even if you put numbers to it and people are like, you know what, that's crazy. It's not going to save us 2 hours. That's good. That's risk management. That's good information. Well, how much time do you think it's gonna save? Like, this is my example. Right now, people are spending all of this time in emails. People are spending this. Here's an anecdotal example. So I estimated on this, right? So it's like start the conversation, and that helps facilitate one, risk management, because someone might know something that you don't. 2, getting some stakeholder support, making sure that they're heard, making sure that they're included, that they're not going to be fighting you the whole time, and just having clarity. And then ROI and payback, it really does help to provide this kind of standardized, structured, number-based, data-driven decision. And so providing that ROI, providing that information about how you're calculating it, it is super important, and it shows that you put the time in and before you're, flushing money down the toilet. There's so many projects fail, and I think a business case in this first pass of QA can really help with that. And then we talked about some of the common traps for business cases and some use case best practices, and I provided a couple of tools. And this is my beautiful team, or most of it. All right, so circling back around. So why? I know that this is at the end, but Molly Yanis, Echo Consulting, like why Echolocity? Why am I talking about business cases? You guys are project management. Well, one, right? Projects, products, initiatives, they all typically have to have a business case associated with it. PMI, project charter, same concept, right? In terms of, hey, here's the reason we're doing this. Here's what we're expecting from it. But it oftentimes goes more into the budget that's actually been approved, as well as the scope that's been approved, and kind of further tailoring it. But I really like to see the process starting from that high-level business case, a little bit more detailed and high-level requirements and potentially estimating and other things like that, and then get to that point of project charter. But in small organizations, small projects, it can all be one document. It can all be one thing. It can even just be a slide. It really depends. We can help. And I mean that in a couple of different ways, right? Like, we can help build business case templates and methodology that's tailored to your organization and that makes sense. We can provide training and specific content around measuring benefits and benefits at your organization. And we can honestly build systems around that too within your existing work management or other things. So I know I used the example of work management in this case. It was just the easiest one for me to think through. We implement work management systems, which is why that one was the one that was top of mind. But we can help with how to calculate ROI and training up your project managers, training up your sponsors, understanding the importance of that. So if you are interested in potentially getting support for getting your team to adopt business case or understand what a business case is or training or things like that, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to us from our website. We have a form. You can schedule a meeting with us, and you can email me directly. My name is Molly, and molly@Echolocity.com. Additionally, just if this was useful to you, we do have webinars on a monthly basis, and we do post all of our content on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, and from our YouTube channel, we talk a lot about project management, work management, digital workplace experience, automations, workflows, etc., all that jazz. So I will leave you with a quick quote, one of my favorite ones. At Echolocity, one of our founding principles, building self-sufficiency, not dependency. So love working with teams that are growing, teams that are looking to solve problems and really lean into and find their flow, and so that they can feel confident that they're working on the highest impact projects and work to really drive those organizational goals forward. And that is where business cases can be a really big tool to help make sure that the team, that your employees understand why they're doing what they're doing and what they're hoping to get from it and how they are connected to that mission and the objective and the goals of the organization. So with that, I will just head back for 1 second to our Q&A. Are there any questions today? All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time for joining us for our webinar on building a persuasive business case and calculating ROI. And my name is Molly Yanis with Echolocity, and we'd love to help you build your business case today. Thanks, everyone.